I've got the pleasure to introduce you today to Tina Woods, who is our first keynote speaker of 2 today, which is very exciting. So hot off the press, Tina is just been announced as the Healthy Longevity Champion. She'll talk to you more about that in a moment. She's also the CEO for Collider Health and works with the All Parliamentary Group for Longevity. The list of achievements here is long, but she's going to give us a wonderful talk on, if I can find the title, Healthy Longevity for All, a blueprint to maximize equitable health and wealth, harnessing science, technology, investment and policy for global sustainable impact. She also has a book, so we can all look that up. Tina's book is Live Longer with AI. So I'm going to pass over to Tina now.
I hope everyone can hear me. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you today. I'm really, really honored. And well, you have the title of the talk. It's quite a mouthful. And I wear a few hats, and that's actually what I bring to all of my work, is actually looking at things from a multi-stakeholder point of view. And so I have been asked to speak for 40 minutes, so that's quite a long time, and I do not have any slides. So I hope I can keep your attention going for 40 minutes. Yes, so I do have a script, so I will keep on script, because otherwise I will go off on all sorts of tangents. Yes, so the general trend, as we know, is that we are living longer, but life expectancy has begun to stagnate and in fact decreasing in the US, for example. In the UK, we spend 1/5 of our lives in poor health, and the poorer you are, the greater your chances of living in poor health. So we must close the gap between the almost 20-year difference in healthy life expectancy between the poorest and richest citizens. In the year 2000, health spending in the UK represented 27% of day-to-day public service spending. By 2024, it is going to be 44%. 44%. The NHS spends vast sums of money treating chronic diseases, many of which are avoidable. And by some estimates, 40% of the costs go on treating preventable conditions. The burden of just one preventable disease, which is cardiovascular disease, costs us £18 billion a year. Crazy. This needs to change. And I would suggest is the burning platform for all of us here today at this conference and for all of us in society. Things have got to change. We need to shift sick care to a new model. And that is obviously what I'm very passionate about. We need to get to a place where we are all living healthier for longer. Compressing morbidity is still a challenge, but we are seeing, as we're seeing at the conference, research is showing how, on the biology of aging, there are many common pathways in major chronic diseases that lead to multiple morbidities. And of course, we are all involved in trying to find the ways to manipulate or influence them. The pandemic has been very helpful to highlight that a geroscience approach targeting aging processes to prevent multimorbidity is an important element to improving health span and to compress, obviously, morbidity. So the Life Sciences Vision, which was published last year, outlines 7 critical healthcare missions that government, industry, the NHS, charities, etc., can work together at speed to solve. From addressing aging to tackling dementia. Probably most of you all know that. But this was the first time, and I think a lot of us in the longevity science community were really excited to see that the biology of aging was actually mentioned. So there has been a lot of progress actually in the last 2 to 3 years. And to obviously spur collaboration in this area, I was really, really pleased to see the launch of the UK Aging Network, who of course, we've got Lynn Cox here, who obviously leads together with Richard Farragher. And that's fantastic to see because we do need collaboration. There's an enormous amount of knowledge that needs to be brought together. And of course, I know Lynn from the work together that we did at the Parliamentary Group for Longevity to really actually highlight all this. Now, one of the 11 groups in the aging networks is the Cognitive Frailty Interdisciplinary Network, CFIN, looking at the emerging discipline of brain capital, which is really, really exciting. I'm going to come on to that in a minute. And that's being explored by my colleagues who will be working with it at the National Innovation Centre for Aging And you mentioned I'm now working with them as a longevity champion. So Lynn Corner and Nick Palmerini, who I'll be working with closely, are very, very expert in this area. So it's obviously an incredibly exciting time to be working in this whole discipline of aging science, because we know that it may not be possible. It will be possible not only to treat age-related diseases at its root, but also to take a preventative approach, which of course is what I'm very passionate about. So at the heart of improved health and well-being is a deep integrated understanding of the mechanisms that contribute to our health across the life course. And this will only be possible if we change how we conduct aging research, both by bringing together scientists from all disciplines, but of course, academia, industry, et cetera. And I know we've got some sessions later on today looking at that. And this means that we need more than just drugs and molecules to target the underlying biology of aging. We need to look, and I've been fascinated by the concept of the exposome, which actually Vin Cox actually first introduced me to, that really describes all the factors in our environment that influence our health and aging trajectory. So that's, pollution, the wider environment, our lifestyle, etc. But let's remember there is so much that we can do now that will have a dramatic impact on our health span. Walking 20 minutes a day has been shown to have a dramatic impact. Many of you will know the studies that were published a few years ago that show this. And actually, a brisk 20-minute walk will increase will reduce your risk of death by upward 30%. So let's remember that simple fact. And also, research by Rand and Vitality, they showed that this simple activity would not only have dramatic health benefits, but dramatic economic benefits. So according to their study, adults between the ages of 18 and 64, if they walked an extra 15 minutes a day, the economic production globally would increase by $100 billion a year. So that's pretty big and pretty colossal. And actually, and it's never too late, because they show that also for inactive people at the age of 40, if they started jogging 20 minutes a day, their health span would increase by over 3 years. So it's quite a dramatic impact. But other areas like blood pressure control. That's a simple intervention which could have a dramatic impact. So recently, and the NHS have been on top of this. I mean, I've received 2 text messages from my GP to get my blood pressure checked. So just imagine the difference that would happen if all of us got a blood pressure checked and we did something about it, and we're able to harness all that data to drive further research on the interventions that can really, really help the population. It would be absolutely dramatic. So these are really simple things that all of us could do right now. So why aren't we doing these very, very simple things that could have such a dramatic impact? So I think it is simple, actually, because human behavior is really complex. And changing behavior is really tough. We need to make it easy and cheap to keep healthy and well. We need the right environment to make the best choices. And the simple fact is that if it's not easy, if it's not cheap, if it's not woven into the daily fabric of our lives, our beliefs, our hopes and aspirations, it ain't going to happen. So we're always looking for the quick fix, the miracle cure, indeed, the pill to solve all of our ills, and even aging, which of course we heard last night at the dinner speak. But we need the hope too. Sometimes it is a simple hope that will actually be the quick fix that will work. I was struck, and I don't know, some of you will probably have been following Eric Topol, who's been quite an active Twitterer, especially during the pandemic. So he tweeted out last week an article by JAMA. And it said that more than half of, this is in the US, more than half of adults take dietary supplements. In 2021, people in the US spent an estimated almost $50 billion on supplements. And the dietary supplement industry spent $900 million on marketing. Most of these supplements, of course, don't work. They have no evidence whatsoever. But people take them because they think it will help them. So I have to admit, we're all human. I'm a bit of a sucker. I take some supplements. I like to think it's not because I'm a victim of marketing, but I'm kind of like a guinea pig, sort of, hopefully they'll work. And I sort of think, well, maybe I should sort of, how am I going to measure whether they're working? Because of course, that's the holy grail. But the thing is, the point is, I'm human. We are all only human. And I think we have to live with that fact. And then we'll come back to that point in a minute. So what companies are actually selling, vitamin companies, supplement companies, are those quick fix hopes in many cases. not necessarily solutions that work. So I admire some of the work that Brian Kennedy in Singapore, some of you may know, and he's very, very interested in this whole field and actually looking at using, aging biomarkers to measure the efficacy of supplements. It's a massive area and it is sorely needed in this space because the vast amounts of money that is being spent in this industry, which actually may not be doing very much at all, except give people hope, of course. Now, Brian Kennedy will also argue that it's the simple things that make the biggest difference. There's a lot of hype in longevity research, and I know many of the longevity scientists around the world. There's still no single drug or molecule yet that can outdo the effects of a bad lifestyle or being in the poverty trap. If you do not eat healthy and don't sleep or exercise enough, or are stressed and worried because you don't have the money to pay the bills, you're worried about your family, you've lost hope for the future, more than 10 years of your life can be up. Those are the stark realities that we have to remind ourselves. So, but more or less, about 25% of the rate of aging and lifespan are controlled by our genetics. And of course, there's fascinating research on supercentenarians that show that, yes, you can have genetic advantages and their morbidity before they die is really, really short. And people like Nir Balslive, many of you know, are running the TAME metformin trial. So he's an expert in this area. But the other 75% is lifestyle, more or less. 75% down to lifestyle shows how we live and really, really matters. Mindset, movement, nutrition, environment, stress, rest, connection, social connection. We know that loneliness is the biggest killer of older people. These are the foundational elements that either speed up or slow down the rate of aging. Now, Brian Kennedy will say this, and he was one of the 30 experts you mentioned in the book. He was one of the 30 experts I interviewed for this book called Live Longer with AI. It was published about a year and a bit ago. And every single one of those experts, and these are top experts around the world, top entrepreneurs, when I asked them, what do you do to keep healthy and live longer? It was all the simple stuff. It was all the simple stuff. And actually what really came out really loud and clear was the purpose and the drive and the passion that they had for the work that they were doing. That really is what got them up in the morning. So hope can be a byproduct of taking a pill, but our sense of purpose and passion cannot, I don't think. It cannot be bought or sold. Some of you know the epidemic of deaths by despair, of course, that Angus Deakin has talked a lot about, the opioid crisis. And that's all connected with loss of hope, loss of purpose, loss of meaning in life. And that leads to premature mortality. So psychological aging is an underexplored area. My colleagues at the National Innovation Center for Aging are looking at this, and in terms of societal brain health and brain capital. And so-called psychological age has been described by some as your chronological age in a healthy state without the mental stress, depression, anxiety, etc. How you feel about your life, how do you feel about your health? So psychological aging, I think, is really interesting and has started to be studied by people who, again, I know people like Alex Zavaronkov, who is the founder of Silico Medicine and Deep Longevity, and he has been doing a fascinating work in AI-driven drug discovery and, of course, aging clocks. And we know that the biomarkers of aging can accurately quantify the human aging process using various sort of biological data types. And these are the aging clocks, which are fascinating and I think are going to really, really change how we think about conducting longevity research. So Alex, together with someone who is this sort of leading light in the US in the technology field called Peter Diamandis, the X Prize and Singularity University founder. So together, they published in late 2020, the first AI-powered psychological aging clock to analyze and interpret psychosocial factors in aging. They looked at how your state of mind and psychological state affects the aging process. Because we know humans, just like animals, we're born, we sort of, develop, we reproduce, we look after our young, and then we gradually decline and die. So it's that gradual decline and die that obviously we're looking at right now. But humans are conscious beings. We have belief systems. We change our priorities, our beliefs, throughout our life course. Now, Laura Carstensen at Stanford, some of you may know, and she's published some interesting work on the socio-emotional selectivity theory, or SST, which shows that the perception of time plays a fundamental role in your pursuit of your life goals. And this can also be manipulated. So applying this SST theory, so people like Alex Zavaronkov and Peter Diamandis, they developed their psychological aging clock on large data sets. I mean, they're AI sort of experts, develop all-cause mortality. People in a subjective age had a much higher chance of dying. They also showed that you can manipulate this to make patients feel younger. So they showed that if you encourage them to be more open about taking risks, for example, or to new experiences, their subjective age prediction is reduced, and they claim by 7 years. So let's look at the data, but interesting. So they concluded that a person's mindset may determine the decisions that ultimately affect their overall health. So, and of course, some of you will also know that the recent studies that have come out on how a sense of optimism is also associated with increased health span. So being and show that being optimistic increases or decreases your psychological age. So Zavaronkov and his team, they've just published a paper in Aging, actually just this week, along with some Harvard researchers, showing how looking at enhancing future well-being with AI tools, and are now doing a follow-up study on the effect of happiness on physiological measures of aging. So just a small personal anecdote. I was recently at a longevity conference, and one of my chums there, we were talking, and I said, oh, I've just discovered my new love, passion for dancing. It gives me so much joy. And what he said, the best way not to age is, quote unquote, pretend you are 30. Listen to that music from 30 years ago. So, and he referenced a very interesting study called, and some of you may know this, the Counterclockwise Experiment by Harvard professor Ellen Langer. She did this way back in 1979 with a group of men. And the study looked at what affects turning back the clock in terms of literally doing as you did when you were 30 years younger, dressing in the same clothes, and actually feeling that you were 30 years younger, versus those who were just reminiscing about the past. And they showed that actually there was a huge difference. Really interesting. So changing thought patterns can slow aging. So all this points, and the reason why I'm going on about this a little bit, is that we need solutions that not only work on the biology of aging, but also on the psychology of aging. And this is why what Nike are doing is so important, others, because it will also lend some insight into why tackling ageism is so important. It is the biggest scourge of our time. It really is, and it keeps on coming up in all the work that I do. Aging stereotypes influence the aging process itself. There are studies that document this, and this is why, you know, ageism actually is a massive barrier to living longer well. So, and this is something that actually a dear friend of mine, Andrew Scott, who wrote the very successful 100-Year Life book, he talks about, but he also talks about the longevity dividend. And actually, together with Harvard professor David Sinclair, who I'm sure many of you will know, and he also wrote a fantastic book called Lifespan, they recently published a study in Nature that showed a slowdown in aging that increases life expectancy by 1 year is worth $38 trillion. That is a lot of money, and it's a lot of potential wasted if ageism gets in the way. So we need solutions that are easy and accessible to everyone, which gives people hope and allows them to follow their purpose and their passions, their reasons for keeping alive, and not be a victim of the scourge of ageism. So I'm not so sure that aging research in animal models will reveal much on the link between, you know, the physiology, our sense of optimism, sense of hope, purpose, etc., and reason for being, which of course the Japanese called ikigai, you know, the reason for being. And of course, in Japan, we have some of the oldest living individuals around who live a very long, happy life, and often they do assign it to that. This is the test to see what works at a basic physiological level that in animal models, and whether they will play out in human studies. Yes, we are animals, but we're not quite like them. We have emotions, belief systems, etc. And I think that does separate us from worms and flies and even mice. So I'm going to switch gear a little bit, and I'm hoping I'm keeping roughly to time. Now, what seems easier to understand in some ways, and I'm just going to take a little sip of water. is that we need to embrace in health the revolutions that have already come in so many other aspects of our lives. Banking, shopping, the convenience sort of culture that we have. We're used to convenience and choice, and ever more so. And we need to have health become as easy as ordering Uber Eats on your phone, so that doctors can order blood tests like that. We can, get access to our medical records like that. We need to engage with our medical records, for goodness sake. Many of us do not. Now, I obviously have a huge interest in AI and data. And in some ways, health data is unlike other data. People are much more concerned about their medical data. They're sensitive, there's a lot of sensitivities around that. But I would argue, well, so is our banking records. Do we want to share our banking records with people? Shouldn't accessing our health data be as easy as accessing our banking records, to make, our financial decisions, to make purchases, etc. So that's an interesting thought, because why shouldn't it be as easy and convenient? Now, health data is plentiful, especially since most of the data that we generate in our lives are, affect our health in some way. And obviously big tech knows this. They hoover up all our data all the time and are now invested very heavily in health. But this is the gold stuff for biomarkers and aging research, actually. And this is why, for example, and maybe some of you are here from Alzheimer's Research UK, of course, initiated the early detection of neurodegenerative diseases, EDOM, with the Gates Foundation, using digital biomarkers via smartwatches, detect, the symptoms of Alzheimer's well before the person themselves even recognize it. So just in case, just to be specific about what a digital biomarker is, for those who aren't as techie as others, it's a quantifiable indicator of a person's physiological and or behavioral state using any range of the connected devices, which of course are increasing, every year. So this includes obviously wearables like the smartwatch, blood pressure monitors, etc., multi-sensor patches, but also implantables like, pacemakers, continuous glucose monitors, and also the IoT technologies that are now really starting to infiltrate our homes and increasingly sort of our wider environments. So these are like, voice assistants like Alexa, obviously, gait monitors and pollution sensors, and the increasing number of sensors that are now being used in age tech, for example, to help people keep independent at home. So now today, dementia is often diagnosed when people first start to lose their memory, and they sort of think, oh, what's going on? But and we all know that the best chance of halting the disease is actually catching it far earlier. And this is where digital biomarkers can be incredibly useful, because they can detect our mood, our memory, the way that we move, sleep, etc. And we know that subtle variations in behavior can often be very, very indicative. And this is, again, what can be picked up with these digital biomarkers. So this is all the holy grail of aging research, to delay the aging process, ward off dementia, indeed, maybe even find a cure, and also to unravel the complexities that links all the chronic diseases together, in which age is a primary risk factor. So thanks to AI, and many of you will also know, and I obviously follow this quite closely, but we know the scientists at DeepMind and University of Washington have used AI to analyze protein folding, the building blocks of life. And we know that misfolded proteins are actually at the root of many of our diseases, including dementia, but also sickle cell anemia, cancer, etc. So the deciphering protein folding is actually quite a mind-boggling revolution, and it's bound to eliminate an entire new area of biology and aging research that we haven't yet been able to study or manipulate. With these new AI tools, scientists can actually look at a range of medical mysteries, new preventative health approaches, new medicines, and of course inform the whole new arena of synthetic biology, etc., which of course in the new UK's sort of science and tech agenda is obviously high on the list. Of course, AI relies on data, and lots of it. We know that the NHS, and we'll all have heard about the NHS having some of the most valuable data in the world. But this raw information, it has vast economic and, of course, societal potential. And obviously, there's no better proof of this than what we've seen with the rapid response during the pandemic. So, so there's a huge amount of interest to harness that raw resource. But this raw data is not powerful on its own. It must be collected, it must be cleaned, it must be curated, and of course stored and managed securely. Then it must be made available in trusted and secure sort of platforms. So, and so some of you will have heard of the concept trust research environments that, of course, has been outlined in Ben Goldacre's recent review, along with 180 NHS and care data saves life strategy, which has just been updated and was actually published this month. And actually, Sajid Javid has been referencing that. So the idea is, with this review on trusted research environments, that for the cost of digitizing one hospital, we can actually move towards this concept of trusted research environments to unlock the untapped potential of our NHS and care data sets, longitudinal data sets. However, we also have to recognize that the NHS data set is only a small part of the story of our health. And yet there's been so much focus on that, and represents a bit of our life journey, of course, when we need help and when we're ill, usually. But what about all the bits outside, the 80% of our determinants of health that lie outside the NHS and care system, all that data that could really tell the story of what is happening in our lives and how we could actually intervene and manage our lives better? How do we collect, curate, and connect this very important data and what is health relevant data, but also link it to our public sector data? And it's not just NHS and care, of course, there's a huge reservoir of public sector data that can furnish huge information on our health. So an organization called Our Future Health, led by Andy Rodham, some of you will know, is an important step forward, for example, in this arena. It's been recently set up to recruit 5 million healthy volunteers in a major health research study, which aims to predict who will get ill in the later years, even before they show symptoms. So going back to some of the concepts that we were talking about earlier. So it's geared to be the UK's largest sort of preventative health study, and it will track people throughout their lives to come up with new ways to prevent, detect, and treat illnesses. And by having such a large pool of participants, of course, we will get a really, really good picture of some of all the areas around preventative health that are sorely needed. Now, the private sector is obviously very involved in this space already, and with consumer and tech companies all over it. So Biogen and Apple, for example, recently announced they were experimenting with how to use handsets to track cognitive function over time and identify mild cognitive impairment. So very similar actually to what the EDON study are trying to do. Now our iPhones, and I have an iPhone, and I do use it to track my health to a certain extent. I could do a lot more. They can now monitor your sleep patterns, your mobility, etc., and may soon be able to detect the early signs of mental health problems like depression, just based on how you use your phone, typos, for example, use of words, that sort of thing. So this is all fascinating stuff, and it takes the whole realm of our health data into this whole arena, which some people call emotion AI. Which is really about using data to gauge how you're feeling, using various data points to understand your emotions, what your thought expressions are. And emotion AI is big business, and of course it's being used experimentally and commercially already. And for example, I saw this for myself. I went to the Goodwood Need for Speed Festival on Sunday and surrounded by Bugattis and Lotuses and these beautiful cars, but they actually had a huge booth called Future Lab. And there's an enormous section there on how all this automotive technologies and other technologies were being looked at for health and the implications and use cases in health. And so I saw for myself, and I actually went into a motion capture machine. And, and of course, they're looking at it from the point of view of harnessing that data as you're walking, for gait analysis, for example. So that's just one simple example. But of course, they're looking at a whole range of applications. And of course, you can imagine all the robotics and what have you there as well. And of course, self-driving cars, they're talking already about them becoming sort of wellness pods. They can monitor all this stuff about you and what have you. So fascinating stuff, and points to the future of where this is all going. So we know that obviously when you've got companies like big tech now, automotive companies, et cetera, all in this health space, we know that there's obviously big business involved, and obviously there's a huge commercial sort of pull there. But the value of health is so much bigger from a societal perspective, and that's what gets me up in the morning. The global pandemic has really shocked the world into realizing how closely linked our health and wealth is, actually. And we need to see health now as an asset that needs to be invested in and protected and nurtured and developed. This means that we need the attention of all the stakeholders in the system. So this is the system change approach that I'm fascinated by. And we need government, we need public and private sectors, all involved. And we need to focus more on prevention together far earlier in people's lives, while addressing the wider determinants of our health and well-being. So system change is really, we need to see it as where health is an asset to invest in, not as a cost in an increasingly unsustainable healthcare system, buckling under the burden of ill health, which of course we have seen during the pandemic, but also because of our aging population. So something needs to change. So we know that the UK government is applying its levelling up policy to increase healthy life expectancy and reduce health and well-being disparities as two of its key missions actually in the levelling up policy paper to drive economic growth ahead. We might see a bit more of this in the future, because I know Boris is very worried about solving many problems to do with that. And the health and economic fallout from the pandemic and the latest demographic trends, of course, presents cities with challenges, but also opportunities. And place-based health, of course, is a massive sort of focus at the moment. So we do need to harness that understanding of what keeps people healthy and well. So longevity cities, and I'm going to turn to some of the work that my colleagues at the National Innovation Center for Aging are doing, is supported by the World Bank and is rooted in the principle of health equals the new wealth. So what is it, longevity city? So it's being trialed in Newcastle and is acting as templates for cities around the world, including Milan, Tokyo, Barcelona, Hamilton in Canada. And it's based on two principles, the longevity city concept. It's based on shared prosperity well-being needs meaningful engagement with citizens, so that's crucial, across the generations as well. So it's not just the older populations, it's across everybody. And two, inequalities must be addressed. And they're focused on all ages across the life course. And really what they're saying is that don't just think about, intervening when we start, hitting the 50s and older. It needs to be across our lives. So what their intention is to create environments, to foster, going back to all the points that I mentioned earlier, to create environments in which people feel good, they well before old age can start to be nudged into healthier behaviors without them even thinking about it. And that, of course, now with technologies is possible. You can actually start to do some of these amazing things. And they are piloting a very interesting project called the Internet of Caring Things, which is almost like how they're going to do it at a place-based. And this is funded, actually, they just received funding by the combined, the North of Tyne Combined Authority, and they're also working with CPI, which is a deep innovation organization. So they're involving local residents, about 600 businesses are involved. And their goal is to obviously develop a world-class ecosystem based on place, testing out technologies, on the high street, sort of looking at how people engage with shopping and going to the banks and looking really at how people behave in their real environments. And the idea is obviously using connected devices and cognitive systems to really track and monitor how people live and conduct their lives and what they really care about. So I've got 10 minutes left. Okay, so I will speed up a little bit, but I think I'm okay. So we know that, for example, one of the things that is an obvious use case is actually tracking people, data analysis, identifying, how we can help people, prevent falls. These are obvious sort of use cases. And motion capture technology, which I referenced earlier, is one example of that. And I think going back to this whole idea of emotion AI, so capturing our emotions, and again, understanding us as human beings, not animals, they will understand, we can use machine learning, for example, to really look at data sets that appear just completely random and unconnected. But of course, AI is able to spot patterns which actually might suggest what interventions or what might be solutions for the future in terms of actually really understanding how to keep people healthy and well. So now for all this to work, of course, and this was actually raised with some of the hysteria actually in the media last year with the whole NHS and care data, NHS Saves Lives strategy, we need residents to engage with this, to feel that they can trust all these technologies, and also are happy to share their data. Now, of course, we share our data all the time to Google and Facebook. I mean, people sometimes forget that. But we need to have an underpinning architecture that needs to be interoperable and trustworthy. So this is some of the stuff that actually came out of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity. We developed what we're calling the Open Life Data Framework as the mechanism to underpin trust and develop a mechanism to be able to share private sector data and public sector data. And this was actually published in November with the huge support of our Science and Innovation Minister, George Friedman, who was there at the launch and spoke about it. And what we're doing there is we're taking learnings and lessons from open banking, which of course was driven. Now, regulation, and that came up yesterday, can be a real spur for innovation, not necessarily a barrier, as some people think. So with open banking, that was spurred by latest thinking in GDPR and also some financial regulation, PDS2 regulation, saying, hang on, big banks, you don't own the customer data. This belongs to the customer, and actually we want to make it easy to bring it to whatever bank they want, data portability, which of course is enshrined in GDPR. And it opened up a huge ecosystem for fintech challenger banks, made it much easier to share data. So we're taking some of those ideas into what we're calling the open life space, make it easy. We need to make health as easy as banking, pensions, finance. And it's all connected anyway. And we think this holds the key to achieving some of the leveling up missions. So, and we also know it will support, and some of you, who are interested in this in terms of the regulatory reforms post-Brexit, the government is very committed to creating a sort of what they call a pro-growth trusted data environment. And they're looking at initiatives like smart data, and they're already moving through legislation to offer the ability for individuals to share data held by private companies with trusted third parties. So again, to be innovative with the use of data. And so ultimately our open data framework, we're trying to achieve and support innovation like this, and perhaps become the underpinning architecture for a healthy longevity scale box. Now, it's not just a sandbox, it's actually at scale to really develop the products and services of the future. So obviously, concepts like the Internet of Caring Things could be part of that. And of course, I see the huge potential in spurring biomarkers and aging research. It would be fantastic and would open up a huge amount of innovation and would also show the UK as a leader in digital regulation with robust global standards to become the world's tech testbed. And we want the aspirations of the UK government. We want the UK to be the best place to test digital innovations. We want to export all these innovations, and we want to realize the UK's ambitions to be a science and tech superpower. So really looking ahead, and of course we're looking to where the funding will come from. We're looking to groups like ARIA, for example, the Advanced Research Invention Agency, to spur some of this work. And actually what we want is to create a UK-wide healthy longevity innovation mission, maybe one of those 8 missions that is being talked about coming out of the UKRI strategy for the National Science and Technology Council. So we've got our aims really high, and I think we have to set our aims really high. We need to really think differently. And we also need to think outside the box of the NHS and care system. And we also, because looking at the National AI strategy and the National Data Strategy, they focus very much on NHS and care. We need to broaden the scope of that dramatically. So we can also do a lot with the NHS and care and data strategy. Actually, its vision is really quite compelling, actually. It's the implementation that will sort of be the test. But we're hoping that with our work, we'll inform, fair value commercial agreements, for example, input into the value sharing framework, come up with commercial models that can really show, bring commercial returns, but also public benefits. So these are all the things I think through our open live data. The other thing too, what is being talked about in a lot of UK sort of strategy, policy documents, is this concept of the living lab. And they're currently being trialed quite extensively in the energy sector. So what we're saying, let's do the same in health creation, healthy longevity. And actually, and crucially, that will allow us to get outcomes data to show evidence that it's working. And critically, in the way that we plan on doing it is by engaging industry, by engaging academia, but fundamentally it's about engaging citizens in this. We want to show trust as an outcome of this through really good digital regulation, because we need that trust. And so the final thing I will mention, which is a key part of the puzzle, and I've got 5 minutes, excellent, is to look at how to help the business community with this. And how to help employers, businesses, investors to improve, to deliver more on the leveling up ambition. So that's been a big part of the work that I'm doing. Business for Health, which is a social venture that, again, was an outcome of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity. So I set that up, run it with John Godfrey at Legal & General, and we have a number of members, and doing some fascinating work with the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry. We have the support of Chris Whitty, our CMO, and we're looking at developing a Business for Health index aligned to the ONS Health Index, which many of you will know is measuring health as an asset, healthy lives, healthy people, healthy lives, healthy people, healthy places. And we're looking at the business index in terms of 3 key areas. Direct impact on employee health, so workforce health. We know that businesses have a huge role to play. The CBI says, listen, 10 to 20% of the NHS and care burden can be reduced by addressing musculoskeletal and mental health, for example. Mental health is a massive area. Second pillar is products and services, food system shaping high on our list. We know that we eat way too much ultra-high processed food. And obviously Henry Dimbleby's proposals are all about, shaking that up and having a whole new view on food. But the other one, of course, is contribution to community resilience and wider societal sort of impacts. And that's where place-based health, the role of local employers and businesses in place, how they, good quality work leading to health and wealth generation, local communities. All these are really important. So we're now developing the methodology with about 35 experts working with the ONS Health Index team, working with Sir Michael Marmot, who of course is the guru of health equity, who is very, very visible in the press at the moment. All looking at how the role of business, and that's employers, businesses, and investors, can actually increase healthy life expectancy and reduce health and well-being disparities. So the key leveling up missions relevant to health. And what we're really doing actually is taking a steer about what has already been happening in the climate change space. Where with net zero and targets and ESG investments. So what we're saying, and this is the big idea, is bringing health into ESG investment. What we're arguing for is an ESHG outcomes framework. And we feel that can really be one of the big radical solutions to drive business and investors to really invest for health. And also to deal with some of the risk factors to our health, like, mentioned food, but also unhealthy housing, poor work conditions, etc. So we think, and this is the big idea, is that we think we can leverage institutional capital, pension funds, and actually George Freeman has been very visible in the press recently talking about that, because on the books before the end of the year is making it easier for pension companies, for example, to invest in high-risk innovation areas. And these, pension funds, we're talking trillions and trillions of capital here, and which could be put to good use, could be put, just like companies are disinvesting away from fossil fuel and coal and investing in clean energy. We need to do the same in health. Health is as important and probably even more important than climate change, and it's all interconnected anyway. So now I was struck at a recent Bidwell's event, and I've got 2 minutes, perfect, I think I'm on time, that I attended recently, and how can we help the UK become a science and tech superpower? And I was struck by one fact alone. If you look at the pension funds of 8 top local authority pension funds, it adds up to £328 billion. And what's more staggering is that they're all supposed to be investing in ESG and net zero projects. And no one is coming to them with proposals to be able to spend that money for good. And, this is crazy. So there's obviously a huge potential there. And what we're arguing is we want to make it easy to invest in a healthy longevity mission. So this is obviously what is getting us very excited. And it's effectively our blueprint. So I would say to you, why not create those big ESHG funds to match long-term patient capital? We know we need long-term money going into prevention, because we know political cycles, NHS budgets, et cetera, all run on very short time cycles. We know that aging biomarkers could help act as proxies so that you can evaluate the success of all this in a much quicker time frame as well, which is also very exciting, and help the UK achieve its ambitions to be a leading superpower. I mean, that is the potential here. So in closing, my message is we must have a greater prevention focus. That is the burning platform. We've got to reduce the demand on our NHS and care system. We need to focus on the 80% that's determining our health, and to drive a sustainable, healthy prevention ecosystem. The goal of society should not just should be to maximize health measures, not just economic performance. So I would argue the whole GDP growth model is actually very outdated. And I think coming out of the pandemic, I think there's a lot of people looking at this. Look at New Zealand, they measure the success of the nation on well-being, and actually that changes how they invest their government money on poverty, homelessness, etc. So I think we're at a turning point here where I think there's some really, really interesting big thinking here. So we need to harness developments we're seeing in longevity science and aging research, absolutely. We need to harness genetic data, financial data, biological, behavioral, all the data that can really hold the clues. And this is where, of course, and I would say this, of course, the ability to harness all these new technologies, the data, making the data environment right so that we can share the data, harness the potential of the data using AI, multimodal learning, etc. And we need to harness the scientific innovation to leapfrog these old models and to really achieve and try and achieve healthy longevity for all. So I think I'm on time, but that's hopefully I haven't bored you to death because I know it's a very long talk, but I think hopefully I've conveyed a picture where we can really, if we get it right, mobilizing science, technology, the business and investor community with government, we can achieve really big things.
Thank you, Tina. I knew there was a reason I was holding on to those jeans from the 90s. So. Can we open up the floor to questions? Yeah, Harriet.
Thank you so much. You covered so much ground and I have so many questions, but I will try and grapple it down to this focus on the data. So I absolutely agree. And I think providing individuals with an opportunity to have oversight and engage in their own data is super important. The analogy with financial data is quite challenging though, because in terms of the actual data, money in, money out, it's all money.
Yeah.
Is quite simple.
Yeah.
And even then it's quite difficult to say, actually, I didn't spend that, that's not me.
Yeah.
And it's wrong. So how do we support people with the data that, I mean, there's so much data that can be collected about them and it's all very complex. I mean, my Garmin tells my iPhone practically every day that I've slept beautifully for 10 hours, which is a lie. But it's because I don't wear my watch while I sleep. And I know that's wrong, but I can, that's quite a simple example, but there's so much data that could be inaccurate or just challenging. So how do we do that?
I didn't say it was going to be easy. It's massively complex. And of course, a lot of data is text data. And of course, there's it's much more complicated. I think some of the principles are similar though, because in the end, what open banking did is they developed a mechanism where, they dealt with the consent issues, the trustworthiness of the system and things like that. So I think that is actually at the heart of it. And we know, for example, in the NHS and Care Data Saves Lives strategy, I mean, what they're trying to, clearly we're housing lots of data, and of course they're trying to now deal with all the sort of social care data, which of course is much messier. It's a lot of it's text, but actually this is where again technologies can help in the natural language processing and all those sorts of things. There are technologies out there that can help to deal with some of these dilemmas. It's not going to be easy. I mean, obviously this is the whole test. So I think we need to have the governance, the underpinning mechanisms right to be able to start to look at the challenges of harnessing this data. And this is where, so the way that we approached it, and actually for the next stage, so we're looking at getting funding for the next stage right now, actually, for the Open Life Data Framework, is you need to trial out the use cases. And actually, when I've been speaking to my colleagues at, NHSX, well, now it's part of the Transformation Directorate, but also at the Center for Ethics and Data Innovation. And, in the end, we need to turn the principles and the theory for ethical data use in the health space into reality. And if I look at, and this comes down to testing use cases and actually working with real people, real doctors, and actually working it out and working through some of those challenges that are clearly very, very complex. So we need to keep it simple. So we've got a few use cases that are in our plans. But also, if I look actually some of the work that we're doing with Business for Health and the Business for Health Index. So right now, we are literally working out questions and the data sets that you need to answer some of those questions on the Workforce Health Index, which is going to be launched in November at the CBI conference. And so, and we're actually working with companies. What data do they have in their companies? What are the drivers of absenteeism and presenteeism? What are the reasons for it? Because that is actually what the ONS Health Index people really are keen on. They've got some of the sort of the higher order data, but what is driving it and actually really untangling that. So in the end, you just have to start and do it and actually work out you know, what is, you know, there's qualitative and also quantitative data. So we're looking at, you know, what are the data metrics that matter most? And that's a big piece of work that we're doing this summer actually on arriving at the 10 core metrics across the 3 pillars in the business framework for health that will make the most difference in terms of healthy life expectancy. And so, you know, so we're you know, you have to test it out and you have to explore, and that's the only way that you're going to be able to understand this, but you know, to work out. But, you know, I mean, big tech are looking at it, but they're not experts in health, and I think they've struggled as well. So yeah, it's a journey.
Lynn and then Graham.
Hi, thanks, Tina. I completely agree with you that our GDP models are broken, and countries that have put well-being as an outcome have actually compressed morbidity when you look at Sweden and New Zealand and places like that. But my question is actually, at the moment, this sounds very positive, very optimistic. It assumes a benign political system. Now, if you look at America, for example, there are lots of young women there who use menstrual cycle tracking apps who are not going to be comfortable sharing their data with the government, well, with a situation where there's been a repeal of Roe versus Wade. How are we going to protect people from abuse of the data when the political situation changes?
Well, so on that front, if I can turn to more of my knowledge in terms of the UK scenario, I think actually, and of course GDPR and all the European legislation around data protection, privacy, and actually the NHS does very, very well, I mean, really to protect our data and address all the privacy sort of issues and what have you. So, and actually, if you look at the work of the NHS X, I know they're not called NHS X anymore, but they've actually been world leaders in the ethical use of data. And actually the code of conduct, it's now, you know, regulation as a service. There's all sorts of things that they've been doing to really, really address, you know, privacy and what have you. So what we need to do is to make sure that that extends across all the different domains of where health data is important. But actually, and this is going to be the test, you know, because I know they're looking at this with agile regulatory reform and you know, even looking at, you know, how do we sort of follow some of the tenets of GDPR, but do some things a bit differently, make it easier. And you've probably heard about, you know, sort of not having cookies anymore and all the rest of it that's been in the press. So I think there's a real balance to be struck. And I think in the end, it comes down to making sure that you've got the governance right and the protections right. And of course, privacy preserving is developing in leaps and bounds, actually. And there's a huge piece of work actually at the moment that the government are looking at just to really get that right. And of course, concepts like trusted research environments are a very, very good example of how you can really reassure the public about, you know, no misuse of their data. So we can take some of those ideas that, you know, being sort of developed, you know, obviously in the context of NHS care data, but we can also take some of those ideas more in the commercial space. So these are all the sorts of things that we're trying to work out. But you're absolutely right, because I think if you don't have public trust, you don't have anything. So it's really, really important. And, you know, so I've just, I've been involved in the BSI group, standards on AI, ethics in AI and health and care. So looking at all of this, you know, how do we really protect that? Because it's absolutely, it's the underpinning of everything. And, you know, trust will be an outcome of a trustworthy sort of governance structure. So the US is obviously a different kettle of fish, but we don't live there.
Graham. If you do Graham next.
Thank you very much, Tina, for a really interesting talk there. So I've got I guess a couple of questions which are interrelated. One's about what you might call digital poverty, and the other's about the access to technology as well for certain segments of society. So just think about where things currently are now and where data is being taken from. So at the weekend, I listened to Dame Esther Ransom talk about, you know, certain age groups getting old, not having access to technologies to park their cars, you know, with those kind of apps. And then in other areas of society where we perhaps don't have access because of our, you know, people's poverty to wearables, etc. So currently, where are the data being brought from, in which segments of society? And is this not telling us a real picture about health equality or inequality across the whole of society? And how are we going to bridge that gap?
So, I mean, that's a hugely important question. And actually is a question that came up yesterday. I work quite closely with the Lovelace Institute, and they actually ran a session yesterday on exactly these issues, because actually the pandemic, even though on the positive side, we had massive digital acceleration for obvious reasons. But actually what is happening and what's at risk of happening is actually increasing the digital divide, actually. And so it is of high interest of government, and actually as part of the whole health disparities question that the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities are looking at. So the digital divide, digital poverty, whose data are we getting? Because of course, there's a lot of people who aren't even accessing health service. So where are we going to find the people who actually need the most help? So this is where, this is where other data sets might help. So if I look, so for example, some really interesting work, and one of the people actually involved in the Open Life Data Framework, so Ian Buchan, who's up at Liverpool, he has developed the Civic Data Cooperatives model, CIFA, you might have heard about, and where during COVID, and they got involved in rapid response and really harnessing local intelligence. And what they did is that they really engaged with the public on really why they needed to engage and why they needed to share their data to really, implement this fast response, solution to the COVID crisis. And I think what was interesting there is that when there is a real clear purpose and need that is understandable by the local community, it's amazing what you can do. And actually you then start to understand who's not getting the vaccines and how do we get them. You then understand the patterns of domestic violence, who are not getting the food, deliveries, et cetera, like that. And this is where, so I think this is a really interesting piece in terms of really accessing those who are at risk of, who are most vulnerable, for example. And, you mentioned the older, there's a massive nut to crack, obviously, with the older generation. Some of them are very digitally literate, so there are some myths around that. But actually, that's, and I do quite a lot of work with a lot of age tech companies. In fact, the work at Newcastle, this is exactly the reason why they're trialing the Internet of Caring Things. They want to find a way to really engage all the population, no matter what your age, to make it really easy. And it's that passive data capture. It's all the devices that you may not even know are around, but are looking after you. Now, we need the trust, that goes without saying, but the whole point of that is to really help those people who might not be as digitally savvy, who may need the most support. But actually, Health Education England, they're massively aware of this. They're trying to equip actually the NHS and care workforce on this as well, but also to bring that into local populations. And so what I can say is that I think there's definitely a recognition that we are actually increasing the digital divide, not closing it right now. So we need to do some pretty radical stuff to help close that. So yeah, that's at the heart of a lot of the thinking in terms of the health disparities reduction. And we're working closely with the Office for Health Improvement on that point, and looking at data to help address that as well.
I know we had some more questions, but I'm a bit conscious of time. So we'll take one last question, I think, at the front here.
Thank you for a fascinating talk. It was brilliant. I'm a PPI representative, so I can drill right down to what it means on the ground. And the sad fact at the moment is that the NHS protects data so well that it belongs to them and not to me.
Yeah.
And I'm actually struggling at the moment. I have 3 monthly blood tests for all sorts of reasons. And for 9 months, I've not been able to get the results so that I can see that's my data.
Yeah.
And I have an app on my phone called Patient Access, but my GP is not signed up to allow me to look at my records. And where Rio, the system that collects mental health records, is concerned, there's a ever decreasing circles debate about whether you can handle the content of your own data, and do you need psychological support to access it. So I think in terms of prevention and aging, we need to take ownership of that data. I'm pushing at the moment for an old-fashioned paper data passport that every one of us can have, and we can transfer digital data, or an app, whatever we want to do, but we can have a document of some sort. So I think I'm fascinated by the things you're saying. I'm also seeing a real cultural challenge for, data doesn't live and breathe unless it belongs to somebody. It doesn't belong to an organization. So I think that's our challenge.
I couldn't agree more with you. Absolutely. And I think culture is the biggest headache. It is so tough. And the NHS and care, there's a massive cultural piece that is needs to be tackled. And so this again is where, you know, a lot of the vision in the NHS and care data strategy sounds great, but you need to address so many factors in the NHS. I completely agree with you. It's the NHS at the moment is geared around the system. It's not geared around the patient, but they are talking about re-gearing it. They have personalized care and support planning, shared care records. It's all about what matters to the patient. It's light years away from that. I mean, I know that because I've been working with, so one of my most fascinating projects recently was actually engaging with the residents of Crawley, which of course near Gatwick Airport, really hard hit by Brexit and obviously the pandemic, with Gatwick being the chief employer in the area. It was absolutely fascinating to speak to people, what their experience of obviously the NHS and care system, but also just generally what they felt about health and their views on community health, how we can mobilize all the assets within the community. I was struck, how many people you have to like fight to get what you need on the NHS. And so if you don't have it in you to fight, you are really, really, really suffering. And so that needs to change. So all I can say is that the place-based approaches that are being looked at, and, you know, a lot of the integrated care systems afoot, it is an opportunity. I'm not saying let's watch this space, but I think at the heart of it is, you know, the individuals, they have to engage with what matters to them, and they have to have access to their health data. That is fundamentally important. So we need to get to that place. But there is a lot of really interesting work going on. So Patients Know Best is a really interesting model that keeps on coming up. So you might want to have a look at that. Yeah. I know it is. Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you. It is a real challenge and it's not going to be easy. Yeah. We need to take control. Us.
Okay. Afraid I know there's more burning questions, but thank you, Tina, one more time. On hands over to Harriet. You know,